G'day legends, I hope that so far you're having a fantastic week, and let's hope that this video today goes a little bit smoother than all the technology problems that I had yesterday. Now, for all the Australians this afternoon going on your 4-day weekend for Easter, I hope you have such a fantastic time, but in this time we always have horrific traffic accidents. So please just take it easy. And in my opinion, if you're 20 under the limit on one of the bloody freeways, it's just as dangerous as 20 over. If you're in a car that can't go the speed limit, or you're towing a caravan, or you're a slower driver, fine. But please use a left lane, use a slow vehicle turnouts, so cars getting past you don't have to speed up too much. But all in all, have a great weekend, and I hope that the Easter Bunny comes for you wherever you are. Now, we do have a lot to go over today. We're going to look at first new strikes in Kharkiv. We're going to look at mobilization. We're going to look at the maps. We're going to look at defenses. We're going to talk about elections. And what we're also going to do is I saw that a former Australian soldier now serving in Ukraine had a TikTok video of him talking about the brutal massacre, the murder that happened within Moscow. And that video that he made, like a reaction to that, then go viral. I was able to actually reach out to him and ask and clarify some of those comments and what was meant by this, and how is your opinion still on this? How does it change, and what's your experience there? So I'll put that in the end of the video because it's just like a snippet of us talking and some quotes and bits and pieces.
We just don't care to see this. There needs to be a lot more of this in Russia. The Russian people need to realize that what they're doing in the world has consequences, and they need to change things from the inside. Until then, I hope we see a lot more of this.
What we're going to look at first, we're actually going to talk about some strikes straight off the bat. Now, one of my contacts, of course, all my people are unnamed. They're anonymous. If you ever reach out to me, whether professionally, private, whatever, always will remain anonymous unless you state otherwise. But I do have a group of very trusted people, and this is from one. I've had to black out some stuff, but on the weekend, the sources in Russia said that the enemy planned to hit us with 200 missiles by Friday. So prepare yourself. Now, we have seen things like this speculated a lot, saying that after those huge strikes last weekend, it's going to take a couple of days, maybe a week, to refuel those Tu-95s, the 22s, all these type of aircraft, to then launch new strikes again. And could potentially that happen? Because what we do know is we're getting reports from Ukraine, from the US, from bloody the MOD, everything, that air defense towards the end of March would be running low. And I think some of the numbers of engagements show that as well. Even if you can engage something, if you don't have the bloody missile to actually then hit it, you can't. And we've actually seen a decrease in the amount of claimed successful strikes that Ukraine has had also. Now, from the news of the day, I guess from the top, was that Kharkiv today, so up in the northeastern corner of Ukraine, still very close to the Russian border, but for the first time has actually been targeted by Russian glide bombs. Now, the reported damage is that it's damage to 3 residential buildings, 3 cars, and the death of 1 civilian. We're going to go look over what Zelensky says here as well. Now, I will say, as far as other strikes, there are reports that air defense is active, as well as strikes in multiple locations across Ukraine as well. Apparently from Tu-22M supersonic bombers out over the Black Sea firing in. But let's look at Kharkiv first. So here we go. This is what Zelensky has said, that Kharkiv, Russian terror against the city becoming increasingly heinous. They launch missiles, well, Shahed drones, and now aerial bombs as well. So these glide munitions. So 1 person has been killed and 19 people injured, including children. And he also states bolstering Ukraine's air defense and expediting the delivery of F-16s. The delivery of the F-16s isn't what's holding up those coming into Ukraine to be used. It is the training of the pilots. Even on the 18-month training package they've been given that is very quick compared to the typical training of a pilot to go into a bloody fighter aircraft. It's one thing to actually train them, put them in the seat, up and down, flying, but for combat flights, it normally takes years. Anyway, also saying there are no rational explanations for why Patriots, which are plentiful around the world and still not covering the skies of Kharkiv and other cities and communities under attack by Russian terrorists. And we have seen in the past couple of days, whether it's from Zelensky or other officials, that there's been more and more outspoken about why the hell don't we have more Patriots. Now, I can give a reason, because a Patriot battery is $1.1 billion, and particularly the US doesn't really have the money currently available for Ukraine for those systems. So that may be the US, but the US has given one. I believe Germany has given 2 systems. Now, we don't know the current status of those, as we do know there has been one of the missile launchers struck and claims of other strikes against parts, but we are unsure because, of course, Ukraine's not going to show us them, because if you geolocate it, that is an incredibly large target, high priority for Russia. But as well, for speaking about air defense, is Air Force spokesman Ilya Yavlash has come out and said that they can target these Zircon missiles. So, of course, Russia has the hypersonic Kinzhal missile, which you're probably familiar with, and as well the newer hypersonic Zircon missiles, which we have seen that targeted Odessa, and he also says on the attack on Kyiv. The speed of the Zircon is approximately Mach 8 or 9, about 10,000 k's an hour. When it enters strike trajectory, the speed drops to a Mach 4.5, of course, because the air gets a lot thicker on the way down. He says, at this moment, we can use our anti-ballistic systems. These are SAMP-T and Patriot, which can inflict powerful damage and shoot down even such weapons. There has been a lot of speculation on whether these can strike that or not, but I'm just here to present information to you. Now, as well, we know there's been strikes in Mykolaiv as well from regional authorities. That preliminary information that a ballistic missile may have struck the city and that there were people injured from that. Now, there has been a massive increase in shelling from Ukraine into the Belgorod region as well. So I'll just show you on the map we're talking about. So, of course, this is Belgorod. This is, of course, Ukraine here. This is Russia. This Belgorod's part of Russia. And we have had a lot of shelling coming from Ukraine into Belgorod, as well as those incursions crossing both into Kursk and Belgorod Oblast. But the shelling has picked up a lot, as we don't see really any of the infantry movements on the ground. You can hear this. So you can see strikes as well. Now, this is a heavily built up residential area to note as well. There are claims that the administrative building in the center was struck too. So let's go back around and see what maybe some new weapons are being used. We've talked about the Zircon. We've also talked about this. Now, this combines like the Fab Glide, but with an engine as well. You and I spoke about this, I want to say about 2 weeks ago, as it's using not only air launch, but it can be from Tornado S as well. And this is when we were talking about there's something new in the sky, because it just looks like more things are getting hit. And this links to maybe what was also hit in Kharkiv, but reported that a specific aviation munition based on the Fab 250 aero bomb, where the bomb is integrated into the body of the planning and correction module. The module has inertial and satellite navigation systems, as well as a rudder, so it can move around. The ammunition was also equipped with an outboard turbojet engine and fuel tank. Now, this is what we spoke about. That glide can only go so far, but if you can get a bit of bloody oomph on that, you combine the glide as well as then power, and you can go further, and it works then as some sort of loitering munition as well, which in essence made the UMPB a cheap analog of a cruise missile, of course, because you're using just dumb old bombs and then hotting them up, if you want to say. The Russian military publics wrote at the same time that the UMPB could also be fired not only from aircraft, but from Tornado S systems. So Ukrainian authorities confirm this, and we have seen them talking that there is something new there. reported the bomb could hit a distance of up to 90 kilometers. What's further than the ordinary Russian fabs. The Russian fabs, of course, depending on the size, you're looking at 30, maybe 40 kilometers max. Now, we're not sure where these bombers actually came from or where the Tornado S systems were that has launched something into Kharkov Glide. But if we're talking, that's the wrong one. If we're talking distance back to territory, we're talking, to Kupiansk area, it's 100 kilometers to Kharkiv. So glide bomb, definitely not there. Maybe one of those could do it at 90 Ks. But of course, if we go into Russian territory over here, you're talking much closer, but you're still talking a good, 30 kilometers. So if it is a glide bomb that's hit there, it's most likely something that has maybe that outboard turbojet engine. Now, talking about Belgorod, and we've seen this increase in strikes into Russian territory. We have heard a lot about that America isn't super happy with this. Now, there is a page called Rev. You can go to internet site. It gives transcripted just like anything out of the White House. Now, this is the question, and we're talking about Matthew Miller here, who, of course, is the Department of State spokesman, and we will talk about him a little bit later on, but I'll just refer to him by his name by then. But the Ukrainians have recently said, this is the question, that after some reports, the US warning them not to target Russian oil refineries. They understood those warnings, but they have a certain military target that they will continue to target. Can you just bring us up to speed with regard to those conversations with the US and Ukraine, and if you guys have recently been telling them that they should not go after these Russian oil refineries? Now, Mr. Miller says, so I'm not going to speak on specific conversations, but it has always been our position since the outset of this war that we do not encourage or support Ukraine taking strikes outside its own territories. But of course, there's been a lot more reports of this happening, which the journalist there has picked up on. I'm not going to speak on specific conversations, but this has been our long-time policy that we have made clear to the Ukrainian government. So it's not something of which they should be unaware. Now, and it'd be interesting with the shelling going in. Now, of course, those pushes in by infantry was, no, these are Russian guys who have formed their own thing. They're backed by us going in. We have nothing to do with it. Sure. But the shelling going in is very clear that it is Ukrainian backed, and we'll see how the US respond to that. I don't think the US will do anything. I think the US will just have a sort of answer filibustering sort of like this, but I'm not super sure. Now, where else are we going to talk? Let's talk then about, well, we'll talk about Zelensky in the next one, but we're going to just have a look at this. So this is in the Sumy Oblast. So this is, of course, Kharkiv Oblast by this border. And then we have the Sumy Oblast, which if I zoom out one, you can see by the border down here, and this across to Kursk. Something we do know is Ukraine is building huge defensive works, both in Sumy, in Kharkiv, and especially down in Kherson. And we'll talk about Kherson and potential crossings there as well. But Zelensky has put on his official pages him inspecting defenses built up in Sumy. Now, you don't build up defenses if there isn't a threat of a potential cross. We know a main priority for Ukraine currently has been building up massive defensive works, and you can see the amount of bunkers being built to live here for extended periods of time. We'll talk about it living for extended period of time with demobilization, as well as tank trap pyramids here as well, which everyone called out that they wouldn't work, and now other side's putting them in so they do work. It's a delaying weapon, like anything in defense is to delay, to strike with other things. So we have seen footage of him there inspecting those. Now, before we have a look at the maps, we need to talk about mobilization and troops on the front. We know Ukraine has a huge shortage of ammunition, of air defense, but more concerning, has a shortage of manpower. Now, we have heard about a bill being put through about demobilizing guys off the front line, remobilizing new people. Now, this bill has been shot down. This is from Kiev Independent, but we'll talk about the lawmaker here. That the National Security and Defense Committee rejected the amendment on demobilization after 36 months of service. So 3 years of service that you'd then come off, have rejected it without the approval of headquarters of Supreme Commander-in-Chief in the new mobilization bill. This is what the lawmaker here has said. We'll look at what he specifically has said. So, demobilization after 36 months service without additional decisions of the rate is rejected. this is my edit. Now, this is translated, so it may not be perfect, but I insist on it. But the National Security Committee did not support it. So far, the committee has supported the amendment of demobilisation after 36 months, but according to the president's decision. So what we're talking about here, the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, we're talking about then Zelensky. The idea of demobilisation is generally buried. They are thinking about options 36 months, but 18 on the front line and still looking for options, but globally as a concept, they don't want to. Very bad news. Now, what is that about 18 months? Well, have a look down here that the Parliament's National Security and Defence Committee also considers the option of demobilisation after 36 months if then 18 of them are spent on the front line. So a year and a half on the front line. Hell of a long time. So the Ukrainian government was hoping to update the legal framework around conscription to ramp up mobilisation efforts in 2024 and actually change and maybe move that age bracket down. As we know, it sits at 27. But the Parliamentary Committee supported the idea of demobilisation after 36 months of service, but only if the president approved it. So Zelensky has denied that going through. And we will talk about the election. We'll talk about mobilisation. Now, why is it 27? And we'll talk about this a little bit more. But if you look at this, now this is from Wikipedia, but all of them show very similar. You can see that Ukraine has a demographic problem. Russia has very similar to this, but you can see just the lack of population that is actually sitting between. I've put these lines in somewhere between 27 and 18. Just don't take my lines as anything. I've drawn these in, but you can see that there aren't many people that actually sit. Well, we need to talk about men. The conscription is men. And there's just not many people actually sit in here. The bulk of this sit from 27 to just over 45. We know the average age on the front line in Ukraine is sitting around 40. Now, this is an opinion piece published, and I think this has some interesting bits in this. So Presidential Advisor Mikhailo Podolyak said that while Ukraine has as many as 1 million personnel in uniform, less than 300,000 may have seen active combat. And the guy asked, what are the rest doing, is one of the questions on the ongoing audit will answer. I can answer you for that. I can answer that for you now, mate. Combat soldiers make only a very small percentage of people in the military. You've got everything from drivers to logistics. You've got people that work in Q stores. You've got people that monitor radars, all of this. If you look at like an infantry battalion or look at a special forces battalion, from combat soldiers to supporting elements is massive. Look at the Australian Army. Australian Army sits tens and tens of thousands of people. You talk about people who are combat soldiers in that, it's a very small percentage of that. I don't have the exact numbers, but I know when I deployed to Afghanistan, I think the combat guys was like 130, but on the operation was like 400, and that's just for regular infantry. You talk about you looking at your special force elements, significantly more support staff to that. So that is why that is. You need a lot of people. You need more people behind the line than on the line. Now, of course, talking about mobilisation, Lindsey Graham had some firm words last week saying, I'd hope that those eligible to serve in the Ukrainian military would join. I can't believe it's at 27. Well, we've shown you why it's probably at 27. You're in a fight for your life, so you should be serving. Not at 25 or 27. We need more people in the line. So more people not only volunteering, but being potentially conscripted as well. Now, my third outtake of this was Ukraine's politicians have been reluctant to lower the fighting age because it would be unpopular. Many defend the relatively high combat age as a social virtue to protect Ukraine's young adults from the battlefield unless they volunteer. Now, mobilization is incredibly unpopular, whether it's in Russia, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it is anywhere in the world. Forcing people to go onto the front line, and especially as brutal, savage war as this is incredibly unpopular. And when there is a demographic crisis in Ukraine, and we know there are high losses, protecting young people is very, very important. Now, something you will see in this is look at the amount of people that are sitting around 15 years of age. This war, 15 to that 18 period, this war probably still has a few more years left, and these people will then be turning 18 in time. A lot of these will then have to return to Ukraine because 18 to 60 can't leave. And who are the people having kids, working long time? It sits in this. These are the most important people to look after in a demographic where your replacement rate isn't meeting your losses. So that's why all that is happening. But will we see the conscription age, mobilization age dropped? Yes. Of course, the volunteer age is still at 18. I think we'll definitely see the conscription mobilization dropped. I think Ukraine is going to have to do that. But this all ties into that there are problems with getting the amount of soldiers required. Now, looking at the maps, of course, this deep state map, MOD map, it doesn't update on Thursdays any week. So we're not going to use this, but we do have a couple of other ones to show and talk to you about as well. So we're going to talk about Avdiivka and Novomaylivka as well. So we'll just come down. I'll show you where. So we'll come down in Donetsk, just to the northwest, and Avdiivka here. Now, these two maps do show very differently here. So we're using this from Noel Reports, the first one here, and he says that the Avdiivka front is relatively stable. Now, Surak map says differently. He shows this. Now, Surak map does show an expansion of control around Berdachi here, as well as near Semenivka across here. Now, it does show that this has been closed up in this area where we did see movement on the map yesterday, as well as we did speak about a potential crossing of the Derna River, but we are unsure. But let's look at what Surak says. Russian army consolidated positions in the western shore of the Derna River and entered the first buildings of Semenivka from the south. Moreover, Russian troops took control over new parts of Berdachi, which is now evenly divided with Ukrainian army in the western part. So like 50-50 of Berdachi and that crossing. If this crossing is confirmed, I believe that is a big step in the first line of defense here and Russia's attempt move then westwards. But speaking of Berdachi, we know how we know this front line was, very, very important. Well, we saw new tanks, especially the Abrams, getting pushed into this area. And with anything going in, there's going to be losses. It doesn't mean that it's just not working. It just is a war. That is what happens. But we have had new footage of an Abrams tank here, which I can't tell from these images whether it is completely destroyed, mobility kill, whatever, but sitting at an area like this with artillery, with drones, even if it has just had mobility kill or whatever on the ground, it's going to be targeted with more after that and then be a complete kill. We did have footage of a drone chasing an Abrams yesterday. To my eye, it looked like it missed, but we do have then footage being said that it is this one here of it then targeting it immobilized here. Now, this one, I don't know if that missed or not, but we know there will be more and more targeting of these elements. This is then another one coming in. So that one would have definitely hit. So we know that if these are being used, really, really trying to hold this area. Now, we just move up into Bakhmut. Now, up in here, we'll talk about Ivanovsky and Klishkivka front. No change on this map. Surak doesn't have a map, but Noel Reports does show that Russia made some ground here. So what he shows is there was movement out from the southwest of Ivanovsky here, out from what used to be then the road of life through here. So you can see where this road loops down. So it's said that it's coming down along here somewhere where my cursor is, as well as movement out from Klishkivka as well. So we can see where this loops. This loop is the train line, and just saying there's an expansion of control down around where my cursor is here somewhere. Can't line this up perfectly, but some expansion of control by the Russian forces there. Now we need to move down into Novomaylivka, one of the hottest areas on the front currently. And we did see that it's about 50-50 under control. Now, Surak map shows this, and of course an expansion of control to the west in the south of this region, saying Russian army made small advances in the southern part along this street. And then Noel maps shows very similar right here. So showing that there is, see where this sits in here, that it has looking, can I draw something more like that? So it's looking, oh no, sorry, back on one street. I'm one too close. Let's do that. Something more like this here. So showing that there are movements here. Noel Reports is a pro-Ukrainian source. So we've got two sources for those who are concerned about this. Now we need to talk about Dnipro River. So of course, Dnipro River basically splits Ukraine in half, running from up in here, up near Chernobyl, all the way through Kiev, all the way down through Nikopol, through Kherson, and out into then the Black Sea. And is acting as a natural barrier between the Kherson, splitting the Kherson Oblast and where the Russian and Ukrainian forces are. And to cross this would be very difficult either way. We see minor crossings, we see, some boats cross, but nothing huge. Now, what we do have today is from the MOD saying on the 20th of March, Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu announced the formation of the Dnipro River Flotilla and a boat brigade. This new formation will likely be responsible for securing the Dnipro waterways and islands that separate Russia and Ukrainian-controlled Kherson. So we're talking down on these splits of land, like the tundra split in areas like this. We see a lot of attempted crossings both ways. It is a realistic possibility that the Dnipro flotilla will be subordinate to the Dnipro group of forces, which combined the ZAP and Dnipro group of forces in Feb 24. Russia likely wants to prevent and deny Ukrainian cross-river operations, such as the operation to establish and maintain the Krinky bridgehead. So we're talking just down in here in Krinky. Russian and Ukrainian forces have both lost large numbers of personnel and equipment in exchanges on Krinky. And the 17th of March, Ukrainian forces in Krinky reported repelling the 10th Guards Russian Naval Brigade in the area. It is likely the formation will decouple river patrolling functions from the Black Sea Fleet, while the Black Sea Fleet is operating further afield in the eastern Black Sea. The Dnipro flotilla will likely be vulnerable to Ukrainian uncrewed surface vehicles, which have been effective in destroying Russian vessels operating in the Black Sea. So it'd be interesting to see what can happen down in here. Reminder of, what's that Vietnam movie? Apocalypse Now, sort of brown water. So for those unaware, you have blue, green and brown water navies, and the Dnipro would be considered brown water, shallower river through there. So be interesting to see how that then goes. Now, I believe that is everything from this part of the video, and then we'll go into the next one.
So I'm not usually one for talking about politics, the war in Ukraine, or things that are happening in Russia. A lot of people today are asking about this attack and asking why Ukrainians aren't, saying, oh, we're so sad to hear this, or people seeing the photos come out of this incident and being shocked. There's a reason the soldiers who are serving in Ukraine, as well as Ukrainians in general, do not care that this is happening in Russia, whether it's civilians or not. Because for the last 2 years, this is all we've been seeing in Ukraine. You see rocket attacks on civilian apartment buildings. I can walk down the street here and see several destroyed buildings. The Russians have been killing Ukrainian civilians for the last 2 years. So when something like this happens, yes, it's never good having innocent life taken away. But what it is here is we're seeing attacks happening on Russian territory, whether it's Moscow or whether it's Belgorod or somewhere else. It's hard to feel sorry for a country having devastation against their own civilians when they're currently causing such destruction in another country. And I know some people are going to compare it to the US and all these other Western countries. Do with that what you will. But from my perspective and a lot of other people's perspectives here, we just don't care to see this. There needs to be a lot more of this in Russia. The Russian people need to realize that what they're doing in the world has consequences, and they need to change things from the inside. Until then, I hope we see a lot more of this.
Yeah, look, mate, this is all I want it to be is like a go over. I'm not trying to point fingers or anything, but I just want to just reconfirm like some things that have been said, and it's not going to be cropped or anything. It'll be however it comes out is how it is. I don't, whether I'm talking to you or someone else, it's just how it runs.
Yeah.
But are you right to get stuck in?
Yeah, go for it.
Perfect. So Sandberg, you had a TikTok goes, I guess, semi-viral on TikTok. Like I just had a look at 17,000 views for TikTok, which I guess is, the beginning of virality. But the video of yours has gone very public then through Telegram as a whole. Yeah. And yourself, what was your previous serving? You served in the Australian military, I'm presuming?
Only briefly for sub 2 years. So it wasn't a very long period at all.
Right. And then you've gone to Ukraine. Can you give us a time frame of how long you've been?
I went originally in October 22, went home in March, and then came back in September. So went home for a couple of months.
And primarily participating in like training or combat ops or?
No, initially the first period over was mostly a waste of time. It was a lot of paying with different brigades, getting contracts and all that kind of stuff sorted. It's not a whole lot too interesting. And then since then, since this return, it's only been combat operations.
Right. Yeah. So the video we're speaking about is, I guess, it's related to the devastating attack that occurred in Moscow. And I guess the theme underlying, to, I guess, quote some of the first line, is like, people are asking why soldiers and Ukrainians in general do not care whether it is civilians or not. And do you think that, you know, amongst your peers and the civilians you're around as well, that there is like no care whether it was targeting Russian military or civilians?
Well, with my peers, I'm only with Ukrainians currently, so it's a bit of a different perspective to obviously a group of foreigners. In general, I'm not sure. I'd have to recap exactly what I said, but it's not that people don't care about civilian loss. In general, I think most people would rather not see civilians killed. It's more that we feel it's good to see attacks happening on Russian territory, not Ukrainian territory, for a change.
Right.
That's more the gist of it. It's obviously so much devastation's been happening here for the last 2 years. To see it not happening on your territory is more kind of where I stand on it.
Yeah, and
bringing the war home.
Do you think it is, a bit of an eye for an eye? Like, I think, people like civilians, I don't care where people are from as civilians. I think civilians are civilians. And you've said again later, like, it's hard to feel sorry for the civilians when they've been carrying out destruction for over 2 years. Do you think, like, it is equal to go, like, those civilians, they are guilty of the war that is happening in Ukraine as well? Because I've seen you talk about, like, well, they voted Putin in and they support the war.
So it's not as kind of clear cut as that. It's not so much that the civilians deserve it. In general, as I said, civilians don't deserve to be being killed. It's more of from a nation standpoint, it's good to see it not on your home territory, be able to hit back. If it was Ukraine that was carrying out this attack, my feelings on it would be very different. It'd be like, why is Ukraine targeting a building of civilians? But obviously this hasn't been an attack carried out by Ukraine. It's a third party or the Russians themselves. So it's more just about seeing internal devastation within Russia as a whole.
And you want to see more internal devastation there?
I think the more, how do I word it? The more chaos that goes on within inside Russia, the quicker they will stop, attacking their neighbor.
But do you not think it could have the opposite effect and it actually unite? Because any event previous like this, like, well, look, let's take Ukraine, for example. Like, the we'll call it terrorist actions of Russia launching the war on Ukraine united the country more so than ever. And any other terrorist action, we look at 9/11, we look at the Blitz, we look at any of them. It has the exact opposite function. It actually unites people. And I actually think Russia is more united behind the cause probably now than it actually was previously. Do you think that there could be a backfire on that too? And this is why people are pointing that it potentially is a false flag event.
I think it's definitely a possibility, but my kind of stance on that is, you're talking about some of those examples you gave then, and those are examples of where this country has attacked another country, and then there's been retaliation. Sorry, the opposite way around. Like, Ukraine didn't attack Russia. Russia's then attacked Ukraine, so then there's been that uniting force. But if Ukraine had attacked Russia and then Russia retaliated, I imagine there would have been a lot more the Ukrainian public being like, what the fuck are we doing here? Why are we fighting this?
Right. You've said later on, just because I've written some notes, you said there needs to be a lot more of this in Russia. And then you say they need to change from the inside. And do you think that there's the way of success for this war for Ukraine is from a change internally in Russia rather than, I guess, combat success on the front?
I think, the Wagner coup, when that happened, was one of the few days I was sitting with my feet up, having some popcorn, having a drink with the guys, just waiting to see everything change very quickly. It's those kind of internal problems that we've seen previously, where it has looked the most positive for Ukraine. As far as on the battlefield, it's obviously a very tough situation at the moment, as you touch on a lot on your channel. It's hard to see when that's going to start looking positive, you know. So as far as the possible outcomes for a victory, not a stalemate or something, then it would be from a internal change, whether the public gets tired of the war or doesn't. When I initially came to Ukraine, I was very much under the belief that most Russians didn't want to be here, that it was all the government. And now these days, I believe that most of the Russian public does support the war to a degree. So it needs to change internally.
Right. And do you think targets like this are going to shift that change?
I don't believe that terrorist attacks will be the way to change it. More so, we're seeing Ukraine doing attacks on refineries and things like that. I think the more the Russians walking around St. Petersburg and Moscow, they don't care about the war because it's on a TV screen, thousands of kilometers away. It's not affecting them for the most part. When you start having rockets near your city, or you're actually seeing the devastation of war in your own country, that's when I think people start to realize that it's not all, green grass. They kind of make it sound.
But I guess on the flip side of the coin to that is, if you have media there saying our neighbor, being Ukraine, that they are terrorists and they want to change your way of life, and they're Nazis or whatever, they say, and then people are seeing a massacre like this, or they're seeing the crossings with multiple launch rocket systems into Belgrade, they're seeing these attacks. Do you think in some way that can have a propaganda backfire, and the civilians there in Russia go, or maybe they are actually telling the truth? As you said, from the beginning of the war through to now, there's been actually more support for the war. Do you think that propaganda can have a backfire on that? I said to you last night, I think your video, one, it was poorly worded, but secondly, I said to you, I actually think you could potentially be feeding propaganda, because, from throwaway comments, as you may see it, with your mates and whatever, and now that video, and now it's been cropped up a little bit, and we won't crop it here, but has now gone through all the Russian telegrams, and I guess has reinforced beliefs. Do you think that there's that effect potentially too?
I'd say it's a small potential of it, but I also believe with most of the Russian propaganda, they're not going to be seeing any of the pro-Ukrainian propaganda out there. Regardless, there's still, a large majority of Russians that deny Butcher ever happened. So I don't think it really matters so much in that way, because there's always going to be different propaganda, and I don't think it's really going to change anyone's mind overall.
Right. And how are your feelings towards Russian civilians? Because one of your ending quotes is, "I hope we see more of this." And then later on in one of the comments, you've actually said, "There is no innocent Russian." Do you believe there is no innocent Russian?
Well, outside of children, I think as far as adults go, that they all play a part in the way that they're not challenging their own government. They're not questioning the war. They're not trying to make a change. Not being innocent doesn't mean that I think they deserve to die. I wouldn't go around hurting civilians. I'd never personally partake in anything like that. So when I say there needs to be more attacks, I do believe there needs to be more attacks, not necessarily ISIS or terrorist attacks, but just in general bringing the war to Russia.
Right. Yeah, I think it's hard because I hope we see more of this, talking about that event, and I think the reflection on yourself as an ex-Australian serviceman and now a Ukrainian serviceman, if you will, can have a negative impact on the propaganda war that I believe Ukraine won the informational space. I believe won for 2 years. I really think until Avdiivka that Ukraine controlled the media narrative, and I think correctly controlled the narrative. And I think it's falling apart a bit at the moment. And I can't put my finger on exactly what, but I think there is a danger in some of that. So that's the only reason I just wanted to clear up some of your comments about how you actually thought about attacks like this, because it's I don't, like, personally, I see children and women and mothers and fathers and people there just, slaughtered by these terrorists. And I'm like, I don't care what nationality, what race, whatever. This is horrible. It's a terrible thing.
Yeah.
Easy.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a political commentator. I'm not the best with my words and the way I obviously discuss these issues. I'm more here and from an emotional point of view, and from a being a military point of view, I think that the war needs to return home to Russia to a degree. I will never agree with the killing of civilians or innocents. I understand it happens in war, but I don't agree with it. Things like this targeting civilians, as I said, I don't agree with it, but I'm happy to see devastation not happening in Ukraine happening to Russia. Not necessarily to the degree from a terrorism attack, but just in general, anything that destabilizes Russia to some degree, I'm happy to see. If that kind of makes sense to what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, mate, Sandberg, is there any final comments you'd like to say? If there's anything I haven't touched on or I've gone wrongfully on?
No, that's all fine. I apologize that obviously the wording doesn't come across quite great. I said innocents and civilians, I'll never agree with being injured. It's not something I personally agree with. I just, I've seen too much of it happening in Ukraine. That's all it is.
Yeah. Well, mate, I appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll speak again at some point in the future.
Yeah, no worries. Take it easy, Willie.
Have a good day, man. See ya.
You as well.
I hope you enjoyed that part. Legends, if you'd like to support me, there's links down below, but I hope you're having a great day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.